The air in the boardroom tasted like stale coffee and expensive cologne. I was sitting at the head of a table that was 40 feet long, made of polished cherry wood that cost more than most people's houses. The city skyline stretched out behind me, a shimmering testament to 45 years of sweat, broken bones, and sleepless nights. I wasn't looking at the skyline, though. I was looking at the faces of the people I had spent my life trying to make happy. My family. The board of Caldwell Industries was technically a corporate entity, but in reality, it was just a stage. My son, Mason, sat to my right. He was 36, but he had the petulant pout of a teenager who had just been told he couldn't borrow the car. He was dressed in an Italian suit that cost more than the annual salary of the man who built the very building we were sitting in. He was scrolling through his phone under the table, ignoring the quarterly reports I had spent a week compiling. My daughter, Amelia, sat to my left. She was the sensible one, or so I had told myself for years. She was a lawyer, sharp, calculating, and she knew exactly how to use the law to protect the one thing she valued most, her inheritance. Next to her was her husband, Gregory, a man who looked at me not like a father-in-law, but like a retirement plan he was terrified of losing. They all had smiles on their faces, but smiles are just teeth in a row. They don't mean anything. I cleared my throat, the sound grating and dry. "Gentlemen," I said, looking at Gregory and then at Mason. "Ladies," I nodded toward Amelia. "We have a situation. The Seattle project is bleeding money. The supply chain is shot, and the contractor we hired is a ghost. He vanished with $1 million deposit." I looked at my son. "Mason, this was your project. You signed off on this guy." Mason finally looked up from his phone. He didn't look ashamed. He looked annoyed that I was interrupting his scrolling with my boring business talk. "Dad, we talked about this," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "You can't micromanage every little bump in the road. You're old school, man. Everyone loses money on a few projects. It's a write-off." I felt a familiar heat rising in my chest, the same heat I used to feel on the construction sites when a worker was slacking off. "A write-off?" I repeated, my voice dangerously low. "Son, $1 million isn't a write-off. It's a salary for 20 families for a year. We aren't just losing money. We are losing trust. My trust. And I assure you, that is not a little bump." Amelia jumped in. She was always jumping in to manage the conflict, usually at my expense. "Dad, calm down. Your blood pressure is—" "Don't tell me about my blood pressure," I snapped, turning to her. "Not you too. You are supposed to be the one who understands the legal implications of this." "Why didn't you vet the contract?" "I did," she said, her voice sharp and defensive. "The contract was fine. The man's references were fine. How was I supposed to know he was a con artist?" I looked at Gregory. "And you? The CFO? Did you review the financials on this before the cash left the vault?" Gregory shrunk in his chair. He was a tall man, but he had the spine of a jellyfish. "Well, Walt, you know, I trusted the team's recommendations." I interrupted, standing up. The legs of my chair scraped against the marble floor, a sound like nails on a chalkboard. "You didn't sign off on it? You approved the wire transfer, Greg. You approved it for my son because you are terrified of him. You're terrified of upsetting the golden goose." The room fell silent. Mason put his phone down, actually giving me his full attention for the first time. "What is that supposed to mean, Dad?" I looked at the three of them. I had built an empire from nothing. I had started as a laborer, hauling bricks in the blistering summer heat. I had worked my way up to foreman, then supervisor, and eventually, I had bought the company from the bankrupt owner. I had built Caldwell Industries into a Fortune 500 company. And what had I done with all that success? I had turned my children into parasites. "It means," I said, my voice weary, "that I'm tired. I'm tired of being the only adult in this room." "Mason, do you know what time the next shift starts at the fabrication plant?" He blinked, caught off guard. 9? "It's 6, Mason. They start at 6 in the morning because they don't have the luxury of sleeping until noon like you do." I turned to Amelia. "And you? Do you know the name of the head of HR?" "Dad, that's irrelevant. It's Bethany, Amelia. She's been working for us for 22 years. You know what she makes? A fraction of what the company pays for your firm's retainer fees. We pay you millions to vet contracts, and we got scammed because you were too busy looking at the reward to see the risk." I took a deep breath. I walked to the window and looked at the city below. It was a beautiful view, a view I had fought for. A view I was beginning to realize I saw alone. "I'm calling a vote," I said, my back still turned to them. "A vote?" Mason laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Dad, you own 51% of the company. Your vote is the only one that matters." I turned around. "Yes, it does. And I am calling for a vote of no confidence. Not in management." I paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "In me. I'm going to step down as CEO." There was a collective gasp. Amelia's perfectly manicured hand flew to her throat. "Dad, you can't be serious. You've had a little bit of stress. The Seattle thing is small fry. We'll fix it. You don't have to. I've already signed the papers." I lied. I hadn't signed them yet, but I was about to. "Effective immediately. Mason, you'll become interim CEO." A smile spread across Mason's face, slow and triumphant. He tried to hide it, but I saw it. The vulture had spotted the dying buffalo. He turned to Amelia, a look of smug superiority on his face. "Well, I guess I'd better start scheduling meetings with the board," he said, tapping his chin. "Amelia, you and Greg will need to report directly to me now." I watched the dynamic shift in real time. The power had transferred, and the facade of the happy family was gone. I was no longer the patriarch. I was an obstacle. Amelia glared at Mason. "Don't get ahead of yourself, Mason. Dad hasn't even left the room yet." "But he's leaving," Gregory chimed in, his voice uncharacteristically bold. "He said he's stepping down. So the company is ours now, isn't it?" I walked back to the table and picked up my briefcase. It was heavy, but it was filled with the weight of my legacy. "It's yours," I said, my voice hollow. "But the legacy isn't. The name, the brand, the goodwill. That belongs to the people who built it. You might want to remember that when you're making your business decisions." They didn't hear me. They were too busy arguing. Mason was already pulling up a new spreadsheet, probably figuring out how to reallocate the profit margins from the workers to his new expense account. Amelia was arguing with Gregory, telling him to stop being an idiot. They were like sharks in a feeding frenzy, and I was just the chum that had been thrown overboard. I walked out of the boardroom without another word. I didn't slam the door. I closed it gently, clicking it shut with a soft thud that sounded like the closing of a casket. My assistant, a young woman named Sarah, looked up from her desk with wide eyes. She had heard the shouting. Everyone in the executive suite had heard the shouting. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice a nervous whisper. "Is everything all right?" I looked at her. She was young, probably in her late 20s. She had been with the company for 3 years, and she worked harder than my son ever had. She was always the first to arrive, and the last to leave. "Sarah," I said, "I'm going to need you to hold all my calls. I'm going for a walk. And I think this time, it's going to be a long one." I walked past her, past the heavy oak doors of the executive floor, past the security guard, who had worked the front gate for 25 years, and into the elevator. The doors slid shut, and I was alone. I didn't go down to the lobby. I went up. I pressed the button for the roof. The wind on the roof of the Caldwell building was brutal. It was a 60-story drop to the street, and the air up here was thin and cold. I walked to the edge and looked over the railing. Below me, the city was alive. Trucks were delivering goods. People were rushing to jobs. Workers were on scaffolds, hammering and welding, building the future. They were the lifeblood of the city, the lifeblood of my company. And I had just handed the keys to the kingdom over to a group of people who had never built a single thing in their lives. I was 68 years old. I should have been retired. I should have been on a beach somewhere, sipping a drink and looking back on a life well lived. Instead, I was standing on a roof, watching my life's work being handed over to the vultures. I pulled out my phone. I scrolled through my contacts. The first one was Mason. The second was Amelia. The third was Gregory. They were all there, glowing under the Favorites tab. I had created that tab years ago, thinking of them as the center of my universe. I deleted the tab. I looked at the sky. It was gray, threatening rain. A storm was coming. I could feel it in my bones. It wasn't just the weather. It was a storm in my soul. I thought about the trust fund I had set up for Mason's son, my grandson. I thought about the college fund I had established for Amelia's children. I thought about the money I had poured into Gregory's failed startups. I had supported them. I had lifted them. And they had repaid me by waiting for me to fail. But here's the thing about a storm. It passes. And if you are smart, you use the lightning to light your way. I wasn't just stepping down. I was stepping back. I was going to let them have the company. I was going to let them fight over the scraps. Because I had a different plan. A plan I had started years ago. A plan they didn't know about. In the basement of my house, buried beneath the old filing cabinets and the Christmas decorations, was a set of blueprints. They weren't for skyscrapers. They weren't for shopping malls. They were for a ranch. A massive, 20,000-acre ranch in Montana, property I had bought in secret, parcel by parcel, over the last 15 years. They thought I was just buying land for a hunting trip. They thought I was just wasting money on an old man's hobby. They didn't know that I was building a fortress, not with bricks and mortar, but with fences and gates. A place where I could live out my days in peace. A place where I didn't have to see the greedy eyes of my children. A place where the only thing I had to manage was the sunrise. I pocketed my phone. I wasn't going to delete their numbers. I wasn't going to cut them out of the will. That would be too easy. Too merciful. I was going to let them have it all. I was going to let them run the company into the ground. I was going to watch them tear each other apart, fighting for pieces of a pie I had baked. And when they had nothing left but debt and legal fees and broken partnerships, I would be gone. They would try to call me. They would try to find me. But I wouldn't be there. I smiled for the first time in weeks. It was a grim, cold smile. I walked back to the elevator. The lights flickered as I stepped inside. When I got back to my office, Sarah was standing there, a stack of messages in her hand. "Mr. Caldwell, the bank called. There's an issue with the transfer. Mason is trying to move funds from the operating account into a new holding company he just created." I didn't even flinch. "Let him," I said. "And Sarah." She looked at me, her eyes full of worry. "You're fired," I said. Her face dropped. "But I don't understand. I didn't do anything wrong." "I know," I said. "You're the best assistant I've ever had. That's why I'm firing you. Because I'm going to need a ranch hand in Montana. The pay is worse. The hours are longer. But the boss isn't a jerk. Are you interested?" She stared at me for a moment, and then she laughed. It was a nervous, relieved laugh. "Sir, I don't know how to ride a horse." "Neither do I," I said. "But that's what YouTube is for. Pack your bags. We leave at dawn." I walked into my office and closed the door. I didn't look back at the boardroom. I didn't look back at the photos on my desk. I looked forward. I looked at the map of Montana I had pinned on my wall. I didn't know what the next chapter of my life would bring. But I knew it wouldn't involve a boardroom. It would involve fresh air. And it would involve freedom. I sat at my desk and started the engine of the destruction I was about to unleash. I sent an email to the entire executive board. It was short and concise. "Effective immediately, I am resigning from all positions within Caldwell Industries. The company is now in the hands of my son, Mason Caldwell. I have the utmost faith in his leadership. Good luck. Signed, Walter Caldwell." I hit send. Then I stood up, picked up my briefcase, which contained only the Montana property deeds, and walked out into the hallway. The boardroom door was open. I could hear them screaming at each other. I could hear Mason yelling at Gregory. I could hear Amelia crying about her cut. It was the sound of a family falling apart. And I was the one who had given them the rope to hang themselves. They didn't know I was on the roof. They didn't know about the ranch. But they would. Eventually. When they had nothing left, they would come looking for me. And they would find me sitting on a porch, watching the sunset, a rifle across my lap, and a closed gate blocking their path. I made my way to the elevator. The doors closed, shutting out the noise. The only sound was the hum of the motor and the beating of my own heart. The storm was here, but I had already sailed past it. I was on the other side, and it was calm. I was heading home. Or rather, I was heading to a new one. The house in the suburbs felt different that evening. It was the same colonial I had bought 30 years ago, the one with the white picket fence that was supposed to represent the American dream. But the dream felt like a lie. The furniture that had always seemed warm and inviting now looked like a showroom display, sterile and impersonal. I walked through the living room, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood. The portraits on the mantel were looking at me, frozen smiles and golden frames. I studied them. There was one of Mason at his college graduation, his arm draped over my shoulder. I remembered how proud I felt that day. I had paid for the party afterward, the massive catered event with the tent and the champagne. He didn't thank me for the car I bought him, but he did post a picture of it on social media. That was his way of saying thanks, I guess. Showing the world what he had, not showing gratitude to the man who gave it to him. I reached out and picked up the picture. The glass was cold. I set it face down on the mantel. I walked to the study. The room was a library, filled with first editions and signed copies of books by famous authors. I had never read most of them. I had bought them to look smart. I had bought them to impress the bankers and the politicians who came to dinner. The walls were covered in accolades, plaques from the Chamber of Commerce, certificates of appreciation from the city. They were all lies, I realized. They were all just pieces of paper designed to make me feel like I was doing something noble. The only real thing in this room was the bottle of bourbon in the bottom drawer of my desk. I pulled it out. It was a 30-year-old bottle, a gift from my father before he died. He was a construction worker, a man who never owned a suit, a man who died with calluses on his hands. He had given me this bottle when I made my first million. He had said, "Save it for the good times, for when you've truly earned a drink." I looked at the bottle and realized I had never opened it. I had been saving it for a good time. I had been waiting my whole life for a good time that never came. I poured a glass. The bourbon burned going down, but it was a good burn. It was a clean burn. It was the burn of truth. I knew what I was leaving behind. It wasn't just a house and a job. It was a legacy. But legacies aren't built on the past. They're built on the future. And the future, I decided, was going to be built in Montana. I walked to the bedroom. It was dark. The bed was made, the pillows fluffed. The maid had been here today. She was probably the only person who still cared about how I lived. I pulled out a suitcase. It was an old leather suitcase, scuffed and worn. I had bought it 40 years ago on a trip to Europe. It had been with me through the best and worst times of my life. It was empty now. I opened my closet. My clothes were divided into two sections. The left side was filled with expensive business suits, tailored jackets, and Italian leather shoes. The right side was filled with jeans, flannel shirts, and work boots. I had worn the business suits to meet the clients, to sit in the boardrooms, to fight the battles. But the jeans and the boots were the real me. I reached out and touched the rough fabric of a flannel shirt. I could smell the pine forests of Montana on it. I could feel the cold air on my face. It was time to put the uniform back on. I closed the closet and walked to the safe hidden behind the painting. I had a lot of things in that safe. Cash, bonds, jewelry. I left them all. I took only the property deeds. I held the deeds in my hand. They were heavy, not with weight, but with meaning. This wasn't just land. This was a new life. I stuffed them into my jacket pocket and walked out of the bedroom. The house was silent. I walked down the stairs. As I reached the bottom step, a light flicked on in the living room. I froze. My hand instinctively went to my pocket, where I usually kept a pocket knife. But it wasn't an intruder. It was my wife, Margaret. She was standing in the doorway, wrapped in a silk robe. Her hair was slightly disheveled. She looked tired. "Walter," she said, her voice a whisper. "I thought I heard something. Are you okay?" I looked at her. I had known Margaret for 40 years. We had been married for 38. We had built a life together. But as I looked at her, I realized I didn't know her anymore. I knew the woman who hosted the dinner parties. I knew the woman who signed the Christmas cards. I didn't know the woman who was standing in front of me. "I'm fine," I said. "Just packing." "Packing?" she repeated, raising an eyebrow. "For what?" I hesitated. She had always been a partner in the business. She had always been the one to smooth things over with the wives of the clients. But she had never been on my side. Not really. She had been on the side of the empire. The empire was crumbling. "I'm going on a trip," I said. "Where?" she asked. "Montana." She walked closer. Her eyes narrowed. "Montana? What's in Montana?" "The rest of my life," I said. She stared at me. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Hurt? Fear? Or just the calculation of how this would affect her social standing? "Walter, you can't just leave." "We have the charity gala next week. The mayor is going to be there. Let Amelia and Mason handle it," I said. "They love the spotlight. They don't know how to handle the donors," she argued. "They don't know the right things to say. They'll embarrass the family." I laughed. It was a short, bitter sound. "Embarrass the family? Margaret, look around. The family is already a joke. They're vultures, and they are just waiting for me to die so they can pick at my bones. I'm tired of being the meat on the table." She didn't argue. She just stood there, looking at me. Then she did something I didn't expect. She walked over to the cabinet and pulled out her own glass. She poured herself a drink. "I'm coming with you," she said. I blinked. "What?" I said, "I'm coming with you. I'm tired of the city, too. I'm tired of pretending I care about the mayor and his wife. I'm tired of this house. It's like a mausoleum. We're both just walking around in it, pretending to be alive." I looked at her. I had misjudged her. I had assumed she was just like the others. But maybe, just maybe, she had been waiting for the same escape I was looking for. "It's not going to be a vacation," I warned. "It's going to be hard work. There's no spa. There's no personal chef. There's just land and sky and a lot of silence." She smiled, a small, genuine smile. "I've been craving silence for decades," she said. "I'll have my bags packed by morning." We stood there, in the middle of the living room, two old people who had spent a lifetime building walls, finally ready to tear them down. We didn't say anything else. We didn't need to. The decision was made. The die was cast. We were leaving it all behind. The next morning, the sun was just starting to peek over the horizon. The sky was a pale pink, like the inside of a seashell. I stood in the driveway, looking at the house. The movers were loading the last of our essentials into a truck. We weren't taking much. We were leaving the antiques, the paintings, the crystal. We were taking the essentials: clothes, books, and a few tools. Sarah arrived in her beat-up Honda. She looked nervous, but excited. She was holding a map of Montana, her thumb marking the spot where the ranch was. "I've got the route planned," she said. "We can make it in 3 days if we drive hard." I shook my head. "No," I said. "We're taking the back roads. I want to see the country. I've spent my whole life looking at blueprints and spreadsheets. It's time to look at some mountains." I looked back at the house one last time. It was just a building, a shell, a cage that I had built for myself. I was leaving it behind, and I wasn't sad. I was relieved. I got into the driver's seat of the truck. The engine roared to life. Margaret got in beside me. Sarah got into the back. I put the truck in gear and pulled out of the driveway. I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. I looked forward. The open road stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt leading to a future that was unwritten. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know if the ranch would be everything I hoped it would be. But I knew one thing for sure: I was free. The vultures could have the scraps. I was leaving the carcass behind. I drove for an hour in silence. The city gave way to suburbs, and the suburbs gave way to open fields. The buildings got smaller. The sky got bigger. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Sarah leaned forward from the back seat. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "what happens when they find out you're gone? What happens when they try to get in touch with you?" I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Let them try," I said. "The phone lines are cut. The emails are going to bounce back. They are going to panic. They are going to blame each other. And I am going to be standing on a porch, watching the sunset, not caring about a single one of them." I stepped on the gas. The truck surged forward. The wind was in my hair. The sun was in my eyes. I was a 68-year-old man, and I was starting a new life. I didn't know what the challenges would be. I didn't know how long this peace would last. But I was ready to find out. The city disappeared behind me, swallowed by the horizon. The adventure had just begun. The city disappeared behind me, swallowed by the horizon. The adventure had just begun. I drove for 3 hours straight, my hands gripping the steering wheel with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in decades. The highway stretched out like a gray ribbon, cutting through the endless expanse of farmland and small towns that dotted the Midwest. Margaret sat beside me, her window rolled down, letting the cool morning air whip through her silver hair. She looked younger, lighter, as if the weight of decades of social obligations had been lifted from her shoulders. Sarah was in the back seat, her laptop open, furiously typing notes about the route and the logistics of the ranch. She had taken to this new life with the enthusiasm of a soldier being deployed to a war zone, ready for battle. We stopped for lunch at a tiny diner in a town called Millbrook, population 400. The sign outside was faded, the letters barely legible, but the smell of greasy burgers and fresh coffee was intoxicating. We sat in a booth near the window, the vinyl seats cracked and worn. The waitress, a woman in her 60s, with a beehive hairdo and a name tag that read, Dottie, brought us menus that were sticky with decades of spilled syrup. I ordered a cheeseburger and a milkshake. Margaret ordered a salad, which made me laugh. We're at a diner, Margie. Live a little. She rolled her eyes but smiled. Fine. I'll have the chicken fried steak. Sarah ordered the biggest burger on the menu, and we ate in comfortable silence. The food was simple, honest, and it tasted like freedom. As I sipped my milkshake, I pulled out my phone. I knew I shouldn't check it. I knew I had promised myself that I was done with the past. But curiosity is a stubborn beast. I turned it on. The screen exploded with notifications. 47 missed calls from Mason. 32 from Amelia. 18 from Gregory. A cascade of voicemails and text messages that I knew were filled with panic and accusations. I scrolled through a few texts. Mason's were frantic. Dad, where are you? The bank is freezing accounts. The board is in chaos. Amelia's were accusatory. You can't just leave. You have responsibilities. This is abandonment. Gregory's were pathetic. Please, Walter, the investors are panicking. We need you. I read them all, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not guilt. Just a vast, empty calm. I turned the phone off and set it face down on the table. They're losing their minds, Margaret said, not asking, just stating a fact. I nodded. Let them. It's time they learned how to swim without me holding their heads above water. We finished our meal and paid the bill. I left a generous tip for Dottie, who had brought us refills of coffee without being asked. As we walked out to the truck, I noticed a man standing by the gas pump next to our vehicle. He was about my age, maybe a little younger, with a grizzled beard and a faded flannel shirt. He was leaning on a cane, watching me with curious eyes. You're Walter Caldwell, he said. It wasn't a question. I froze. I had hoped to disappear, to vanish into the anonymity of the open road. I had forgotten that in a small town, everyone knows everyone, and strangers stick out like sore thumbs. I used to work for you, the man continued, a slow smile spreading across his weathered face. 20 years ago, I was a foreman on the Henderson project. You came to the site one day and helped me carry a load of lumber. You didn't have to. You were the boss. But you did. He extended his hand. I shook it. His grip was firm, calloused. The hand of a man who had earned his living the hard way. Name's Charlie, he said. Charlie Haskins. Retired now. Moved out here to fish and watch the sunsets. I smiled. It's good to see you, Charlie. I'm sorry I don't remember you. There were a lot of projects. No worries, he said. You were a good boss. Fair. Paid on time. Treated us like men, not like tools. He nodded toward the truck. Where are you heading? Montana? I said. I bought a ranch up there. Retiring. Charlie's eyes lit up. Montana. Good country. You'll like it. Hard winters, but the summers are pure gold." He paused, looking at me with a knowing expression. "You running from something?" he asked. I hesitated. "You could say that." Charlie nodded slowly. "We all are to some extent. The trick is to run towards something, not just away from it." He clapped me on the shoulder. "Good luck, Mr. Caldwell. I hope you find what you're looking for." We said our goodbyes, and I climbed back into the truck. As I pulled out of the gas station, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw Charlie still standing there, watching us leave. He raised his hand in a wave. I raised mine in return. The drive through the Midwest was long but soothing. The flat farmland gave way to rolling hills, which gradually transformed into the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. We stopped for the night in a small motel in the outskirts of Denver. The rooms were cheap, the carpets were stained, and the heater rattled like a dying engine, but it was the best sleep I had gotten in years. The next morning, we hit the road again, crossing the border into Wyoming. The landscape changed dramatically. The sky became impossibly blue, the air thin and crisp. I could see the peaks of the Grand Tetons in the distance, snow-capped and majestic. It was a sight that made my heart swell. I had spent my life building things, but I had never built anything that compared to the beauty of nature. We drove through Yellowstone National Park, taking a detour to see Old Faithful. Margaret had never seen it before, and she watched the geyser erupt with childlike wonder. Sarah took photos, documenting our journey. I just stood there, feeling the spray of the mist on my face, breathing in the sulphurous air, and feeling alive in a way I hadn't felt in decades. We reached the outskirts of the ranch just before sunset. The gate was old, made of rusted iron, and it creaked as I pushed it open. The driveway was long, winding through a valley dotted with pine trees and wildflowers. As we crested the final hill, the ranch house came into view. It wasn't a mansion. It was a log cabin, sprawling and rustic, with a wraparound porch and a stone chimney. It looked like something out of a postcard. I pulled the truck to a stop and just sat there, staring at it. This was it. This was my new life. Margaret squeezed my hand. Sarah let out a low whistle. "It's beautiful, Mr. Caldwell." "It's ours," I said, and the words felt more real than anything I had ever said before. The first few weeks on the ranch were a whirlwind of work and discovery. I had bought the property through a shell company, and the previous owner had left most of the furniture behind. It was old, worn, and covered in dust, but it was functional. I spent the days fixing the fence, chopping firewood, and learning the lay of the land. Margaret took charge of the house, cleaning and organizing, turning the dusty cabin into a home. Sarah proved to be a natural at handling the logistical nightmare of running a remote property. She set up a satellite internet connection, ordered supplies, and even managed to find a local handyman who could help with the heavy lifting. For the first time in years, I wasn't managing a corporation. I was managing a life. But I knew that the past was never truly dead. It was just waiting. And I was right. 3 weeks after we arrived, the first letter came. It was addressed to me, care of the ranch, sent by certified mail. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Amelia's. I opened it with a sense of dread. The letter was filled with accusations. How could I do this to them? How could I abandon the family, The company was in shambles. Mason had made a series of bad decisions, alienating the board and losing key clients. Gregory had attempted to hide losses, and the auditors had discovered it. The legal fees were piling up. They were drowning. They begged me to come back, to fix things, to save them from themselves. I read the letter twice, then folded it and placed it in the drawer of my desk. I didn't reply. A week later, a second letter arrived. This one was from Mason. It was less accusatory and more desperate. He admitted his mistakes. He said he was sorry. He asked me to come back, just for a month, just to stabilize things. He promised he would change. He promised he would be a better son. I read it, and I felt a pang of sadness. Not for him, but for the relationship we could have had. The one I had always wanted. I put the letter in the drawer and closed it. The third letter came 2 weeks later. It was from a lawyer. It was a summons. They were suing me for abandonment of fiduciary duty. They were claiming that I had, knowingly, left the company in a state of instability, and that I was liable for the losses. I laughed when I read it. It was such a predictable move. When they couldn't win me back, they tried to destroy me. I called Leonard, my old lawyer, the one I had fired when I left. He had been my friend for decades, and we had parted on awkward terms, but I knew he would help me. I told him the situation. He laughed too. "They can't sue you, Walter," he said. "You resigned. You have no fiduciary duty once you're not a director. They're grasping at straws." "I know," I said. "I just wanted to hear you say it. But Leonard, they're going to come here. They're going to show up at my doorstep." "Let them," Leonard said. "You're on private property. You have a gate. You have a rifle. And you have a conscience that is clear." He paused. "But Walter, are you sure this is what you want? You can still fix things. You can go back. They're your children." I looked out the window at the mountains. The sun was setting, painting the peaks in shades of gold and crimson. "No, Leonard," I said. "I'm not going back. I'm staying here. This is my home now. If they want to find me, they'll have to drive 1,000 miles. And when they get here, they'll see a locked gate and a man who doesn't care about their money." A month passed. The letters stopped. I thought they had given up. I was wrong. It was a Saturday morning, crisp and cold. I was splitting firewood in the front yard when I heard the sound of an engine. I looked up. A car was coming up the driveway. It wasn't a local truck. It was a sleek, black Mercedes sedan. It pulled up to the gate and stopped. The driver's door opened. Mason stepped out. He was wearing a suit, his hair slicked back, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. He walked up to the gate and gripped the iron bars. "Dad!" he shouted. "Dad, I know you're in there. Please just talk to me." I set down the axe and walked toward the gate. I didn't run. I didn't hurry. I took my time, savoring the moment. When I reached the gate, I stood on the other side and looked at my son. "Mason," I said, "you're a long way from home." "Dad, please," he said, his voice cracking. "I know I messed up. I know I made a lot of mistakes. But you have to help me. The company is going under. The bank is going to foreclose. Amelia and Gregory are suing each other. It's a disaster. I need you. I can't do this alone. I looked at him. I looked at the desperation in his eyes. I saw the boy I had raised, the boy who had taken his first steps in my office, the boy who had asked me for advice when he was starting his first business. I felt a wave of emotion. It was powerful, threatening to break through the walls I had built. But then I remembered the boardroom. I remembered the way he had smiled when I stepped down. I remembered the way he had treated me like an obstacle, not a father. Mason, I said, my voice level and calm. Do you remember what you said to me the day I left? Do you remember what you said to the board when you thought I was out of the room? He looked down at his feet. You said I was old school. You said I was a dinosaur. You said the company needed new blood, new ideas. I leaned closer to the gate. Well, here you are. The new blood. The new ideas. Show me what you've got. Dad, I can't. I don't know how. I never learned. You always did everything for me. Exactly, I said. That's the problem. I did everything for you. I gave you everything. And you took it for granted. You didn't want a father, Mason. You wanted a bank. And the bank is closed. He started to cry. Big, ugly sobs that shook his entire body. Please, Dad. I'll do anything. I'll change. I'll be a better son. I'll be a better person. Just give me one more chance. I looked at him. I looked at the tears streaming down his face. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to open the gate and pull him into a hug and tell him everything was going to be okay. But I knew it was a lie. It was always a lie. Mason, I said, I'm not giving you a second chance. I already gave you 50. You wasted them all. Go home. Figure it out yourself. You're a grown man. It's time you started acting like one. He stood there for a long moment, his hands gripping the bars. Then, slowly, he let go. He turned and walked back to his car. He didn't look back. I watched him drive away, his taillights disappearing down the dusty road. I felt a pang of grief, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of peace. I had done the right thing. Not for him, but for me. I walked back to the woodpile and picked up the axe. I had more firewood to split. The sun was rising over the mountains, and it was going to be a beautiful day. That night, Margaret found me on the porch, staring at the stars. "He's gone," I said. She nodded. "I know. I saw him leave. I think I broke him," I said. "Maybe," she replied. "But he was already broken, Walter. You just stopped pretending he wasn't." She sat down beside me and took my hand. We sat in silence, watching the sky. The stars were so bright, so clear, that I felt like I could reach out and touch them. I realized in that moment that this was what I had been searching for all my life. Not power, not money, not the approval of my children. Just this. The silence. The peace. The love of a good woman and the freedom to be myself. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose. I wasn't going to wait for them to destroy themselves anymore. I was going to live my life. I had spent 68 years building a legacy that was never really mine. It was time to build something that was. I went to the barn and found the old tractor. It was rusted, but it still ran. I spent the morning tilling the soil near the creek. I was going to plant a garden. I was going to grow my own food. I was going to be self-sufficient. I was going to be free. Sarah joined me, her sleeves rolled up, her hands covered in dirt. She was grinning from ear to ear. "You know," she said, "I never thought I'd say this, but I love it here. I love the quiet. I love the hard work. It's real. It's honest. Welcome to the rest of your life," I said. "It might not be glamorous, but it's yours." As we worked, I thought about the future. I thought about the summers that would pass, and the winters that would test us. I thought about the generations of Caldwells, who might one day call this ranch their home. And I realized that I had done the most important thing I had ever done. I had saved myself. The company could collapse. The family could tear itself apart. It didn't matter. I had found my peace. I had found my place. I had found myself. The story of Walter Caldwell is not a story of revenge. It's not a story of a man who destroyed his family to get even. It's a story of a man who realized that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your children is to stop enabling their selfishness. It's a story of a man who understood that the ultimate act of fatherhood is not to give your children everything, but to teach them that they are capable of building their own lives. My children may never learn that lesson. They may spend the rest of their lives blaming me for their failures. But that's their burden to carry, not mine. I have a new burden now. It's the weight of a life well lived, a life of purpose and meaning, a life that is not defined by the expectations of others. As I sit here on this porch, watching the sun dip behind the mountains, I realize that I have been given a second chance. Not many people get that. I squandered decades of my life chasing a dream that was never really my own. But now, I'm chasing a new dream. And this one is worth chasing. The wind is cold. The sky is dark. The stars are starting to peek through the fading light. I take a sip of my bourbon. The burn is familiar, comforting. It's the burn of truth. I have one final thought before I close my eyes for the night. It's a thought I want to share with you, wherever you are, whoever you are. The people you love are not always the people who are good for you. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is to let go. Sometimes, the greatest act of strength is to walk away. And sometimes, the greatest adventure of your life begins not when you find something new, but when you leave something old behind. I finished my glass and stood up. The night air was crisp, and I could see my breath in the moonlight. I walked back into the cabin. Margaret was reading by the fire. Sarah was in the kitchen, humming a tune. This was my family now. This was my home. And I knew, with a certainty that filled my heart, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The story of Walter Caldwell is over. Or maybe, it's just beginning. The gate is locked. The past is gone. The future is bright. And the old man is finally free. If you enjoyed this story of redemption and second chances, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic situation? Have you ever had to choose your own peace over the expectations of family? I'd love to hear your story. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is close the gate and start a new life. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.